I walked into my grandson's birthday party with a smile on my face and a carefully wrapped gift in my hands, never imagining that within the next hour I would be standing in the middle of that decorated living room, feeling smaller than I had felt in years. My name is Margaret. I'm 62 years old, and I've spent the last 3 decades of my life trying to be the kind of mother, grandmother, and woman who shows up, who helps, who loves without keeping score. But that afternoon in September, in a suburban house in Ohio, where the autumn leaves were just beginning to turn golden outside the windows, I learned that sometimes kindness can be mistaken for weakness, and silence can be mistaken for permission to disrespect someone who has given everything. The party was for my grandson Tyler's 7th birthday. He's a sweet boy, with his father's dark hair and his mother's sharp green eyes, and I adore him with the kind of love that only grandparents understand. I had taken the morning off from my job at the community center to pick out his gift, a science kit he had been talking about for months, and I drove 40 minutes across town to get there on time. When I arrived, the house was already full of children running around with balloons, parents chatting in clusters, and the smell of pizza and cake filling the air. My daughter-in-law Jessica was in the kitchen, arranging plates and cups with the kind of precision that always made me feel like I was being judged for not doing things her way. My son Daniel was outside setting up games in the backyard, and when he saw me through the window, he waved, but didn't come to greet me. I told myself he was busy, that it was a chaotic day, that I shouldn't take it personally. Jessica barely acknowledged me when I walked in. She glanced up from the counter, gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, and said hello in a tone that felt more like a formality than a welcome. I set my purse down on a chair and asked if there was anything I could do to help, but she waved me off and told me to just sit down and relax. So I did. I found a spot in the corner of the living room where I could watch Tyler open his presents and laugh with his friends, and I tried to ignore the feeling that I was somehow in the way. If you're listening to this story and you recognize that feeling, that sense of being tolerated rather than wanted, I hope you'll take a moment to subscribe to this channel. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers, and your support means the world to me. Just click that red subscribe button and join this community of people who believe that every voice matters. The party went on, and I stayed quiet in my corner. I watched as Jessica served pizza to the children, then to the other parents, then to Daniel and his brother, who had flown in from California for the occasion. Plate after plate was handed out, and I waited for mine. I assumed she was busy, that she would get to me eventually, that maybe she had simply lost track in the chaos of managing a dozen 7-year-olds hopped up on sugar and excitement. But then the pizza was gone. Every slice had been distributed, every guest had been served, and I sat there with an empty lap and an empty stomach, watching everyone else eat. I glanced over at Jessica, thinking maybe she had set a plate aside for me somewhere, but she was laughing with one of the other mothers and didn't even look in my direction. I told myself not to make a scene, not to be difficult, not to ruin Tyler's special day by pointing out that I had been deliberately overlooked. Then came the cake. Jessica brought out a beautiful 2-tiered chocolate cake decorated with spaceships and stars, and Tyler's face lit up like it was Christmas morning. Everyone sang happy birthday. Tyler blew out the candles, and Jessica started cutting slices. Again, she served the children first, which made sense. Then the parents, then Daniel, then his brother, then even the neighbor who had stopped by for just a few minutes. I watched as piece after piece was handed out, and still, no one brought me a plate. I kept waiting, kept hoping that maybe I was being paranoid, that maybe my slice was coming and I just needed to be patient. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't an accident. This was intentional. And the worst part was that nobody seemed to notice. Or if they did, they didn't care enough to say anything. I looked over at Daniel, my son, the boy I had raised, the man I had supported through college and his first job and his wedding and the birth of his own child. I caught his eye, hoping he would see the hurt on my face, hoping he would step in and ask his wife why his mother was sitting there without food while everyone else enjoyed the party. But instead, Daniel looked away. He looked away. And then I saw his shoulders shake, and I realized with a sickening twist in my stomach that he was laughing. He was laughing. My son, who I had sacrificed so much for, who I had loved unconditionally, was laughing at my humiliation. Jessica said something to him that I couldn't quite hear, and he grinned and shook his head like it was all some kind of joke. Like I was some kind of joke. That was the moment I knew I had to leave. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because I knew if I stayed any longer, I would either cry in front of everyone or say something I couldn't take back. So I stood up quietly, smoothed down my skirt, and picked up my purse. Tyler ran over and threw his arms around me, thanking me for the science kit, and I hugged him tight and told him I loved him and that I hoped he had the best birthday ever. Then I walked out the front door without saying goodbye to anyone else. Nobody stopped me. Nobody followed me. I got into my car, drove home through streets blurred by tears, and spent the rest of the evening sitting in my living room, trying to understand how I had become so invisible to the people I loved most. If this story is resonating with you, if you've ever felt overlooked or disrespected by the people who should value you most, please consider subscribing to this channel. We're building a community here, and every subscriber brings us closer to our goal of 1,000. Just hit that subscribe button and let's grow together. Your support truly matters. The next morning, I woke up with a dull headache and a heavy heart. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and tried to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to call Daniel and tell him exactly how hurt I was, to demand an apology, to make him understand that what happened was not okay. But another part of me, the part that had learned over the years that sometimes people only value you when they need something from you, told me to wait, to see if he would reach out first, to see if he even cared enough to notice that I had left his son's party without a word. So I waited. I went about my day. I answered emails. I did laundry. I tried to distract myself. And then, late in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was Daniel. For a moment, I thought maybe he was calling to apologize. Maybe he had realized what happened. Maybe Jessica had said something. Maybe he felt guilty and wanted to make things right. I answered the phone with a cautious hello, and he launched right into conversation without even asking how I was. He sounded stressed, talking quickly about a problem with his mortgage payment. Apparently, he and Jessica had miscalculated their budget for the month, and they were short on the payment that was due in 2 days. He needed to borrow $2,000. He said it like it was a foregone conclusion. Like of course I would help. Like I always helped, because that's what I did. I was the safety net. I was the backup plan. I was the person who showed up and fixed things and asked for nothing in return. But this time, I didn't respond right away. I sat there holding the phone, listening to him explain the situation, and I felt something shift inside me. This was the same man who had laughed at me less than 24 hours earlier. The same man who had watched his wife disrespect me and had done nothing. The same man who hadn't even bothered to check if I was okay after I left his son's party. And now he was calling because he needed money. Not because he cared about me. Not because he valued me, but because he needed something from me. And I realized in that moment that if I kept giving without ever standing up for myself, if I kept letting people treat me like I didn't matter, then I would spend the rest of my life feeling exactly the way I felt sitting in that living room yesterday, watching everyone eat while I went hungry. So I took a deep breath, and I said 3 words. Just 3 words. I said them calmly, without anger, without explanation, without giving him a chance to argue or guilt me into changing my mind. I said, "I can't, Daniel." And then I hung up the phone. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat there staring at my phone, half expecting him to call back immediately, to demand an explanation, to get angry or defensive. But the phone stayed quiet. Minutes passed, then an hour, then the whole evening. He didn't call back. He didn't text. And I realized that my refusal had probably shocked him more than anything I could have said, because in all the years of his life, I had never once told him no when he needed help. I had always been there, always been available, always put his needs above my own. But not this time. This time, I chose myself, and it felt terrifying and liberating all at once. If you're following along with this story and you want to hear how it ends, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. We're working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your subscription helps us keep sharing these real, honest stories. Just click that subscribe button now. It only takes a second, and it makes a huge difference. Over the next few days, I heard nothing from Daniel or Jessica. I went to work. I spent time with friends. I tried to focus on the parts of my life that brought me joy rather than pain, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't hurting. I kept replaying the party in my mind, kept seeing the way Jessica had ignored me, kept hearing Daniel's laughter. I kept wondering if I had overreacted, if I should have just brushed it off, if withholding the money had been too harsh. But every time I started to doubt myself, I remembered how it felt to sit in that room, hungry and humiliated, while my own family treated me like I was invisible. And I knew I had made the right choice. Respect isn't something you should have to beg for from the people who are supposed to love you. It should be given freely, or it's not real love at all. About a week after the party, I got a text from Daniel. It was short, just a few lines, asking if we could talk. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to think about what I wanted to say, how I wanted to handle this conversation. I knew that if I let him back in too easily, if I forgave him without him truly understanding what he had done, then nothing would change. The same pattern would repeat itself, and I would find myself right back in that corner at the next family gathering, invisible and unimportant. So I waited another day before I replied, and I told him we could meet for coffee at a neutral location, a cafe downtown where we used to go when he was in college, and we would spend Saturday mornings talking about his future. When we met, he looked tired. There were circles under his eyes, and he seemed older somehow, worn down in a way I hadn't noticed before. We sat down with our coffees, and for a few moments neither of us spoke. Then he started to apologize, but it was the kind of apology that felt more like an excuse. He said he was sorry if I felt hurt, sorry if there had been a misunderstanding, sorry if Jessica had been too busy to notice I hadn't been served. Every sentence started with if, like my feelings were hypothetical, like what happened was up for debate. And I realized he still didn't get it. He still didn't understand that this wasn't about a missed plate of pizza or a slice of cake. This was about respect. This was about being valued. This was about him choosing to laugh at my pain instead of defending me. So I stopped him. I put my hand up and I said, "Daniel, I need you to listen to me. Really listen. What happened at Tyler's party wasn't a misunderstanding. Your wife deliberately excluded me, and you stood by and laughed. You laughed at me. Do you have any idea how that felt? I'm your mother. I've been there for you your entire life. I helped pay for your education. I supported you when you lost your job. I've babysat Tyler more times than I can count, and I've never asked for anything in return. But the one time I needed you to stand up for me, you laughed. And then, the very next day, you called asking for money like nothing had happened, like I don't have feelings, like I'm just a resource you can use whenever it's convenient." He looked down at his coffee, and I could see his jaw tighten. For a moment, I thought he was going to get defensive, to tell me I was overreacting, to minimize what had happened. But instead, his eyes got red and his voice cracked when he finally spoke. He said, "You're right. You're absolutely right. And I don't have an excuse. Jessica has been stressed about money, and she's been taking it out on you because she thinks you judge her, and I've been too much of a coward to tell her to stop. And when she didn't serve you at the party, I didn't know what to do. So I just laughed it off because that's what I always do when I'm uncomfortable. I laugh. But it was wrong, Mom. It was so wrong, and I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I didn't defend you. I'm sorry I called asking for money without even checking if you were okay. I'm sorry I've taken you for granted." His apology felt real this time. There were no ifs, no deflections, no excuses, just honesty, and I could see that he meant it. But I also knew that words alone weren't enough. I told him that if things were going to change, if our relationship was going to move forward, then I needed to see action, not just apologies. I needed him to have a conversation with Jessica about how she treats me. I needed him to set boundaries and make it clear that disrespecting me was not acceptable. And I needed him to understand that I wouldn't always be there to bail him out financially or emotionally, that I had my own life and my own needs, and that I deserved to be treated with the same care and consideration that I had always shown him. Before we wrap up this story, I want to remind you to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. We're so close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and every single one of you helps us reach that goal. Just click the subscribe button below and join our community. Let's grow together. Daniel nodded and promised he would talk to Jessica, and that things would be different going forward. I wanted to believe him, but I also knew that change doesn't happen overnight. People don't just suddenly start valuing you because you demand it. They have to choose to see your worth, and that choice has to be made over and over again in the small moments of everyday life. So I told him I appreciated his apology, but that I needed some space. I needed time to heal from what had happened, and I needed to see consistent change before I could fully trust him again. He looked disappointed, but he didn't argue. He just nodded and said he understood, and that he would do whatever it took to make things right. We finished our coffee in a kind of heavy silence, and then we went our separate ways. I drove home feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness because I had hoped our relationship would never come to this, that I would never have to set such hard boundaries with my own son. But relief because I had finally stood up for myself. Because I had finally said out loud what I had been feeling for so long, and because I had made it clear that I wouldn't accept being treated as less than I deserved. It was painful, but it was also necessary. And in a way, it felt like the beginning of something new, something healthier, even if it was built on the ruins of what had come before. In the weeks that followed, Daniel did reach out more often. He called to check in, not to ask for anything, just to talk. He sent photos of Tyler, he invited me to dinner, and when I finally accepted and went to their house, Jessica was noticeably more polite. She made sure I had food, she asked about my day, she even thanked me for coming. It wasn't perfect, and there was still a kind of awkwardness between us. But it was progress. And I could see that Daniel was making an effort, that he was trying to rebuild what had been broken. I didn't forgive everything all at once, and I didn't pretend that one conversation had erased years of being taken for granted. But I did allow space for the possibility of healing, for the chance that we could find a new way of relating to each other that was built on mutual respect instead of one-sided sacrifice. One afternoon, a few months after that terrible birthday party, I was at their house again for Sunday lunch. Tyler ran up to me as soon as I arrived and dragged me into the backyard to show me a fort he had built. We spent an hour playing in that fort, him telling me elaborate stories about knights and dragons, and me just soaking in the joy of being with him, of being wanted and included. When we came back inside, Jessica had set the table, and this time, there was a place set for me right next to Tyler. Daniel pulled out my chair, and as I sat down, he looked at me and said quietly, "Thank you for giving me another chance, Mom. I know I didn't deserve it, but I'm grateful." And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt seen. I felt valued. I felt like I mattered. I'm not going to pretend that everything is perfect now, because it's not. Relationships are complicated, and rebuilding trust takes time. There are still moments when I feel the old hurt creep back in. Moments when I wonder if I made the right choice by staying connected instead of walking away completely. But I also know that standing up for myself that day, saying no when I had every reason to say yes, was one of the most important things I've ever done. It changed the way my son sees me, but more importantly, it changed the way I see myself. I'm not just a mother or a grandmother or a helper. I'm a person with my own needs and feelings and boundaries, and I deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, not because I'm useful, but because I'm human. If you've made it this far in the story, thank you for listening. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I really hope you will. We're building something special here, a place where people can share their stories and feel heard and supported. Just click that subscribe button and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support means everything, and it helps us keep creating content that matters. Looking back now, I can see that the birthday party was a turning point. It was the moment I stopped accepting crumbs and started demanding a seat at the table. It was the moment I realized that love without respect is not really love at all, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself and for the people you care about is to refuse to be diminished. It's not easy to set boundaries with family, especially when you've spent your whole life putting their needs first. But it's necessary, because if you don't value yourself, no one else will. And if you keep giving endlessly without ever asking for anything in return, eventually, you'll run out of things to give, and you'll be left empty and resentful and wondering why nobody seems to care. I think about that day often, about the way I felt sitting in that living room, invisible and unimportant. And I think about the way I felt when I hung up the phone after telling Daniel no, terrified, but also strangely powerful. Both of those moments were hard, but they taught me something crucial. They taught me that I have a choice. I can choose to stay silent and accept mistreatment, or I can choose to speak up and demand better. And while speaking up might cost me comfort or approval in the short term, staying silent would cost me my dignity in the long term. And that's a price I'm no longer willing to pay. Tyler is 8 now, and we've had another birthday party since that awful one last year. This time, I was greeted at the door with a hug. I was served food first, and I was included in every part of the celebration. Daniel made sure of it, and Jessica, to her credit, went out of her way to make me feel welcome. It wasn't just about the food or the party, though. It was about the message it sent, the acknowledgement that I matter, that my presence is valued, that I'm not just a convenient resource, but an important part of this family. And when I left that party, I left feeling full. Not just in my stomach, but in my heart. That's what respect feels like. That's what it feels like to be seen. So if you're in a situation where you're being overlooked or disrespected, whether it's by family or friends or colleagues, I want you to know that you have the right to stand up for yourself. You have the right to say no. You have the right to demand better. And yes, it might be uncomfortable. It might cause conflict. It might even cost you relationships that weren't as healthy as you thought they were. But it will also give you something invaluable, your self-respect. And once you have that, once you truly understand your own worth, no one can take it away from you. No one can make you feel small unless you let them. And you don't have to let them. Not anymore. Before I go, I want to ask one more time for your support. If this story touched you, if it made you think or feel or reflect on your own relationships, please subscribe to this channel. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers, and we can't do it without you. Just click that red button and become part of this community. Let's keep sharing these stories. Let's keep supporting each other. And let's keep reminding each other that we all deserve respect and kindness and love. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. And remember, you matter. You've always mattered. Don't ever let anyone make you forget that. I never thought I would be the kind of woman who had to fight for basic dignity in her own family. But life has a way of surprising you, doesn't it? In the months after that second birthday party, the one where I finally felt welcomed and seen, I I started to notice patterns in my life that I had ignored for years. It wasn't just Daniel and Jessica who had taken me for granted. It was everywhere. At work, I was the one who always stayed late to help with projects that weren't my responsibility. In my friend group, I was the one who always hosted, always organized, always made sure everyone else was having a good time while my own needs went unnoticed. I had built my entire identity around being helpful, being available, being the person who never said no, and in doing so, I had taught everyone around me that my time, my energy, and my feelings were less important than theirs. It's a strange thing to realize in your 60s that you've been living your life wrong. Or not wrong exactly, but in a way that hasn't served you. I had been so focused on being a good mother, a good employee, a good friend, that I had forgotten to be good to myself. And the truth is, nobody was going to give me permission to change that. Nobody was going to suddenly wake up one day and decide to treat me better out of the goodness of their hearts. I had to claim that space for myself. I had to be the one to say, "This is who I am. This is what I need. And if you can't respect that, then maybe you don't deserve access to me." It sounds harsh when I say it out loud, but it's also true. And sometimes the truth is harsh. After that conversation with Daniel at the coffee shop, I made a decision. I decided to spend the next year focusing on myself in ways I never had before. I started saying no to things that drained me. I stopped volunteering for every committee at the community center. I stopped agreeing to babysit Tyler every single weekend, just because it was convenient for Daniel and Jessica. I started taking a pottery class on Tuesday evenings, something I had always wanted to do but never made time for. I joined a book club with women my age, who actually asked me questions about my life and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. I even started dating again, something I hadn't done since my husband passed away 8 years earlier. Nothing serious, just coffee dates and dinners with men I met through friends or online, but it felt good to be seen as more than just a mother or a grandmother. It felt good to be seen as Margaret, a whole person with interests and desires and a life beyond my family. If you're enjoying this continuation of the story, please don't forget to subscribe. We're building a community here of people who understand that setting boundaries and choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. Click that subscribe button and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support keeps these stories coming. Daniel noticed the change in me. At first, he seemed confused by it, maybe even a little hurt. He would call to ask if I could watch Tyler on a Saturday, and I would check my calendar and sometimes say no because I had plans. He would invite me to dinner on a Tuesday, and I would decline because that was my pottery night. I could hear the surprise in his voice each time, that slight pause before he said okay, like he was recalibrating his understanding of who I was, and I think that's exactly what was happening. For his entire life, I had been a constant, always available, always accommodating. Now I was something different. I was someone with boundaries, someone with a life that didn't revolve entirely around him and his family, and he had to adjust to that new reality. Jessica's reaction was more complicated. I think part of her resented the fact that I was no longer at her beck and call, but another part of her seemed to respect me more. There was less of that condescending tone in her voice when we spoke, less of that attitude that suggested she was doing me a favor by allowing me into her home. She started asking my opinion on things, genuinely asking, not just going through the motions. When they were deciding whether to enroll Tyler in soccer or baseball, she called me and wanted to know what I thought based on my experience raising Daniel. When she was struggling with a difficult situation at work, she invited me to lunch and asked for advice. It wasn't a complete transformation, and we still had our moments of tension, but it was progress. And I started to see that maybe the reason she had treated me poorly before wasn't just about her own insecurities or stress, but also about the fact that I had allowed it. I had never pushed back, never demanded respect, so she hadn't felt the need to give it. One evening in late winter, about 6 months after I had started making these changes in my life, Daniel showed up at my house unannounced. It was a cold night, the kind where the wind cuts right through you, and he looked frozen standing on my doorstep. I invited him in, made him a cup of tea, and waited for him to tell me what was going on. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where he had done his homework as a child, and he started talking. He told me that things with Jessica had been difficult lately, that they were arguing about money and parenting and all the stresses that come with trying to build a life together. He told me he felt overwhelmed, that he didn't know if he was doing anything right, that he missed the version of himself that felt confident and capable. And then he said something that broke my heart a little. He said, "I miss having you around all the time, Mom. I know I took you for granted, and I know things needed to change, but I miss you." I reached across the table and took his hand, and I told him the truth. I told him that I missed him too, but that the old version of our relationship wasn't sustainable for me. I told him that I had spent so many years giving everything I had, and that it had left me depleted and resentful, and that I couldn't go back to that even if I wanted to. But I also told him that I was still here, that I still loved him, and that we could build something new together, something healthier and more balanced. I told him that he didn't need me to solve all his problems or be available every second of every day. What he needed was to learn how to stand on his own 2 feet, to figure things out with Jessica, to build his own support systems instead of relying entirely on me. And I told him that I believed he could do that he was stronger and more capable than he gave himself credit for. We talked for hours that night, really talked in a way we hadn't in years. He opened up about his fears and insecurities, about the pressure he felt to be a good father and husband and son, about how he sometimes felt like he was failing at all of it. And I listened, really listened, without trying to fix everything or take on his burdens as my own. I offered perspective, I offered encouragement, but I didn't offer to solve his problems for him. And by the end of the night, I could see something shift in him. He looked lighter somehow, like the act of being honest about his struggles had lifted some of the weight he'd been carrying. When he left, he hugged me tight and thanked me, not just for that conversation, but for everything, for raising him and loving him, and also for loving myself enough to set boundaries. It was one of the most meaningful conversations we'd ever had. Please take a moment to subscribe to this channel if you're finding value in this story. We're working hard to build a community of 1,000 subscribers, and every person who clicks that button helps us get there. Your subscription matters, and it takes just a second. Spring came, and with it a sense of renewal that felt almost poetic. The trees outside my house started to bloom. The days got longer, and I felt like I was blooming too in some way. I had lost weight without trying, not because I was stressed, but because I was taking better care of myself, cooking meals I actually enjoyed, instead of just eating whatever was convenient. I was sleeping better, laughing more, feeling more present in my own life. My pottery teacher told me I had a natural talent, and I started selling some of my pieces at a local craft fair. It wasn't about the money, though the extra income was nice. It was about the feeling of creating something with my own hands, of being recognized for a skill that had nothing to do with being someone's mother or grandmother. It was about being Margaret, the artist. Margaret, the woman with hobbies and passions, and a life that was entirely her own. Tyler's 8th birthday came around, and this time the party was different from the start. Jessica called me 2 weeks in advance and asked if I wanted to help plan it. Not in a way that felt like she was dumping work on me, but in a way that felt like genuine collaboration. We sat at her kitchen table with notebooks and Pinterest boards, brainstorming themes and activities, and it felt almost friendly. We decided on a superhero theme, and I offered to make capes for all the kids as party favors. I spent evenings sewing those capes, each one in a different color, each one with a letter on the back for the child's name. It was a labor of love, and when I brought them to the party, the kids went absolutely wild. Tyler hugged me so hard I thought my ribs might crack, and Jessica actually teared up a little and thanked me for putting in so much effort. The party itself was wonderful. I was included in everything, served food at the same time as everyone else, asked to help blow out the candles with Tyler, included in the family photos. Daniel kept catching my eye across the room and smiling, and I could see the relief and gratitude in his expression. At one point, he came over and put his arm around me and said, "This is how it should be, Mom. This is how it's going to be from now on." And I believed him, not because I was naive, but because I had seen the effort he and Jessica had been making, the ways they had been trying to show me that I mattered. Words are easy, but actions mean everything, and their actions told me that things had truly changed. After the party, after all the guests had left and Tyler was exhausted and happy in his room playing with his new toys, Jessica asked if I wanted to stay for a glass of wine. We sat on her back porch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, and she said something I never expected to hear from her. She said, "Margaret, I owe you an apology. Not just for the party last year, but for the way I've treated you in general. I've been defensive and cold, and I've let my own issues get in the way of building a relationship with you. The truth is, I've always felt like I could never live up to your standards, like you were judging me for not being the perfect wife or mother, and instead of talking to you about it, I just pushed you away. But I see now that a lot of that was in my head, and that you've only ever tried to help and support us. I'm sorry for making you feel unwelcome in our lives. You deserve so much better than that." I was stunned. I had expected a lot of things from Jessica over the years, but genuine vulnerability and accountability were not on that list. I told her I appreciated her apology, and that I was sorry too for any ways I might have made her feel judged or inadequate. I told her that I had never meant to make her feel that way, that I had only ever wanted to be helpful, but that I understood how my help might have sometimes felt like criticism. We talked for a long time that evening, really talked, and by the end of it I felt like I understood her better and she understood me better. We weren't best friends, and maybe we never would be, but we were family, and we were finally starting to treat each other like it. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. We're so close to our goal of 1,000 subscribers, and your support makes all the difference. Just click that subscribe button and join our growing community. As summer arrived, I found myself in a place I never expected to be. I was happy. Not just content or okay, but genuinely happy. My relationship with Daniel and Jessica and Tyler was better than it had ever been. My friendships were deeper, because I was investing in them instead of just showing up out of obligation. My work felt more fulfilling, because I was setting boundaries around my time and energy. And I was dating a man named Robert, a retired teacher who loved hiking and old movies and had the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. We had met at the book club, of all places, when he showed up as a guest of one of the other members. We started talking about a novel we'd both read, and the conversation flowed so easily that we ended up getting coffee afterward, and then dinner the next week. And then we just kept seeing each other. Robert was different from my late husband, but in a good way. He was thoughtful and attentive, always asking how I was feeling, always making sure I knew that my opinions and preferences mattered. He never assumed I would rearrange my life for him, and he respected my time and my commitments. When I told him about what had happened with Daniel and Jessica, about the birthday party and the phone call and the months of rebuilding that followed, he listened without judgment and then said, "It sounds like you did exactly what you needed to do. It takes courage to stand up for yourself, especially with family." And I realized that was exactly what I needed to hear. Not someone telling me I had been too harsh or that I should forgive and forget. Someone acknowledging that what I had done was brave and necessary. One Saturday afternoon in July, Robert and I went hiking at a state park about an hour outside of town. It was a beautiful day, warm but not too hot, with a breeze that made the trees rustle and the sunlight dapple through the leaves. We hiked for a couple of hours, talking and laughing and enjoying the quiet of the woods, and when we reached a clearing with a view of a small lake, we sat down on a fallen log to rest. Robert pulled out a thermos of iced tea he'd brought, and we sat there sipping our drinks and looking out at the water, and I felt a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. He turned to me and said, You know, Margaret, I think you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. The way you've rebuilt your life, the way you've set boundaries and still managed to keep your family together, it's really something special. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Not sad tears, but grateful ones. I told him that I didn't always feel strong, that there were still days when I doubted myself and wondered if I had done the right thing. But he shook his head and said, "Strength isn't about never doubting yourself. It's about doing what's right even when it's hard, even when you're scared, even when you don't know how it's going to turn out. That's what you did. And look at where you are now." I leaned my head on his shoulder, and we sat there in comfortable silence, and I thought about how much my life had changed in just 1 year, how I had gone from feeling invisible and unimportant to feeling seen and valued, how I had gone from giving everything and receiving nothing to building relationships based on mutual respect and care, how I had gone from being defined entirely by my roles as mother and grandmother to rediscovering who I was as an individual. As the summer went on, I continued to nurture all the different parts of my life. I spent time with Tyler, but on my terms, doing things we both enjoyed like going to the science museum or baking cookies together. I had regular dinners with Daniel and Jessica, but I also maintained my own social life and hobbies. I kept seeing Robert, and our relationship deepened into something that felt real and lasting. I kept taking my pottery class and selling my pieces at craft fairs. I kept saying no when I needed to, and yes when I wanted to. And with each passing week, I felt more and more like the person I was always meant to be, the person I had buried under decades of self-sacrifice and people-pleasing. If this story is speaking to you, if you see yourself in any part of my journey, please subscribe to this channel. We're building something meaningful here, and every subscriber helps us grow. Just click that red button and become part of our community as we work toward 1,000 subscribers together. In August, Daniel and Jessica asked if I wanted to go on a weekend trip with them and Tyler to a cabin in the mountains. My first instinct was to say yes immediately, to drop everything and make myself available. But I paused. I checked my calendar. I had plans that weekend with Robert, a concert we'd been looking forward to for weeks, and I realized I had a choice. I could cancel my plans and go with my family, falling back into the old pattern of always prioritizing them over myself. Or I could be honest and tell them I had other commitments, trusting that they would understand and that there would be other opportunities. I chose the latter. I told Daniel I had plans, but suggested we schedule a different weekend. And to my relief and gratitude, he didn't push back. He just said, "Of course, Mom. Let's find a time that works for everyone." And we did. We found a weekend in September, and the trip was wonderful, full of hiking and campfires and board games and laughter. On one of those evenings by the fire, after Tyler had gone to bed, the three of us sat outside wrapped in blankets, watching the flames dance and the stars appear in the darkening sky. Jessica turned to me and said, "You seem really happy, Margaret. There's something different about you, lighter or something." I smiled and told her that I was happy, happier than I'd been in a long time, and that a lot of that had to do with finally learning to prioritize myself. Daniel nodded and said, "I'm glad, Mom. You deserve that, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." We sat in comfortable silence for a while after that, and I felt a deep sense of gratitude for where we had ended up. It hadn't been easy, and there had been painful moments along the way, but we had come through it stronger and more honest with each other. As fall approached and the leaves started to turn gold and red, I found myself reflecting on the past year and everything that had changed. I thought about that awful day at Tyler's 7th birthday party, how small and invisible I had felt, how much it had hurt to be disrespected by the people I loved most. And then I thought about the choice I had made the next day, when Daniel called asking for money. The choice to say no. The choice to finally stand up for myself. That one moment, those 3 words, had set everything else in motion. It had forced Daniel to see me differently, to reckon with how he had been treating me. It had forced me to see myself differently, to recognize that I had worth beyond what I could do for other people. And it had ultimately led to the rebuilding of our relationship on a foundation of respect, rather than obligation. I'm not going to tell you that everything is perfect now, because life is never perfect. There are still moments of friction, still times when old patterns try to creep back in, but the difference now is that I recognize those moments, and I address them. If Daniel calls at the last minute asking for a favor, and I can't or don't want to do it, I say so without guilt. If Jessica makes a comment that feels dismissive or rude, I address it calmly and directly instead of letting it fester. And most importantly, I continue to invest in my own life, my own happiness, my own sense of self. Because I've learned that you can't pour from an empty cup, and that taking care of yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary for everyone involved. Before we reach the end of this story, I want to encourage you one more time to subscribe to this channel. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers, and your support helps us continue sharing these honest, real stories. Just click subscribe and let's grow together. Last month, Tyler turned 9, and the party was the best one yet. It was at a local park, and I helped set up decorations and organize games, not because I felt obligated, but because I genuinely wanted to be involved. When it came time to eat, Daniel made sure to hand me a plate first, catching my eye and giving me a small smile that said he remembered, that he hadn't forgotten. Tyler gave a little speech before blowing out his candles, thanking everyone for coming and specifically mentioning me, and how much he loved the superhero cape I had made him for his 8th birthday that he still wore all the time. My heart swelled with love and pride, and I looked around at my family, at this life we had built together, and I felt genuinely grateful. After the party, Robert joined us for dinner at Daniel and Jessica's house. It was the first time he had met them, and I was nervous about how it would go, but I shouldn't have worried. Daniel was welcoming and friendly, asking Robert about his life and his interests, and Jessica went out of her way to make him feel included. Tyler was fascinated by Robert's stories about teaching and kept asking him questions throughout the meal. At one point, Daniel pulled me aside in the kitchen and said, "He seems great, Mom. I'm really happy for you." And I could tell he meant it. There was no jealousy or weirdness, just genuine happiness that I had found someone who treated me well and made me smile. As I drove home that night, Robert in the passenger seat humming along to the radio, I thought about how impossible all of this would have seemed a year and a half ago. Back then, I was trapped in patterns that were making me miserable, but I didn't know how to break free. I thought that if I just kept giving, kept sacrificing, kept putting everyone else first, eventually I would be appreciated and valued. But that's not how it works. You teach people how to treat you, and I had taught everyone in my life that my needs didn't matter. It wasn't until I started teaching them something different, started showing them that I had boundaries and self-respect and a life of my own, that things began to change. So if you're reading this, or listening to this, and you're in a similar situation, I want you to know that it's never too late to change the dynamic. It's never too late to start valuing yourself, to start setting boundaries, to start saying no when you need to, and yes when you want to. It won't be easy, and it might cost you relationships that aren't willing to adapt, but it will also give you something invaluable. Your dignity, your self-respect, and the possibility of relationships that are based on genuine love and mutual care rather than obligation and convenience. You deserve that. We all deserve that. And sometimes, claiming what you deserve requires having the courage to walk away from what's hurting you, even if what's hurting you is the way the people you love have been treating you. My story doesn't have a neat, tidy ending, because life doesn't work that way. I'm still navigating relationships, still learning and growing, still figuring out how to balance loving others with loving myself. But I'm doing it from a place of strength now, from a place of knowing my worth, and that makes all the difference. Every day I make choices that honor who I am and what I need, And those choices add up to a life that feels authentic and fulfilling. That's all any of us can really hope for, isn't it? A life that feels true to who we are, surrounded by people who see us and value us for exactly that. Thank you for being here, for listening to my story, for allowing me to share this journey with you. And please, if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel. Help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers so we can keep sharing stories like this one. Stories that remind us all that we matter, that our feelings are valid, that we deserve respect and kindness and love. Just click that subscribe button right now. It only takes a moment, but it means the world to us. Together, we can build a community where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued. Thank you for being part of that. Thank you for being here.